Surely, at this point, you've seen Imperial Yeast's amazing selection of high-quality brewing yeasts over at imperialyeast.com. But you might not be as familiar with Imperial Yeast's special order yeast bank. In addition to their tried-and-true core strain selection, Imperial Yeast has a number of ale or lager strains, Brettanomyces, Kveik, and other yeasts available for special order. If you're looking to match a yeast strain currently in production, or just looking for something new to play with in the brew house, reach out to Imperial Yeast customer service to see what they may have in store. Special order strains are subject to a 10-liter order minimum and require a 2 to 3 week propagation time, but they might just be what you're looking for your next brew. You can get more information about Imperial Yeast's special order strains by calling 503-477-5826 or emailing customerservice@imperialyeast.com. Welcome to the Brü Lab. From early engineering advancements like moving bulk liquids and ingredients over distances to the discovery and isolation of yeast microbes to more modern advancements like gene identification and editing, brewing science has been a force for advancing humanity's scientific knowledge. And still, at the same time, while often seeming like a white tower that's inaccessible except to the select few, beer occupies a workman's position in society, so much a part of most people's daily lives that it's often taken for granted. All that extra effort, complexity, and dedication that brewers require to make great beer is often lost. I'm your host, Cade, and today as we celebrate the last time in the Brü Lab, I'm speaking with two industry veterans and an industry-winning homebrewer about the importance of brewing science. John Bryce hardly needs an introduction as he's been the voice of the MBAA podcast for years. Of course, he's also dedicated to brewing science, having graduated from the VLB in Berlin and served as a former technical director of the MBAA. Vinnie Cilurzo also needs no introduction, who along with his wife Natalie built the Russian River Brewing Company. They're of course award-winning brewers and makers of the Pliny the Elder, which is consistently voted one of the best beers in America. And finally, another who needs no introduction is co-host of the Applying in the Science episodes of the Brü Lab and gold medal winning homebrewer Jordan Folks. That's a pretty all-star team to talk about the importance of brewing science. And I thought that'd be kind of a fitting way to end the show. Let's do kind of like an ode to the thing that has made this podcast successful, which is its focus and dedication to brewing science. So brewing science has certainly had a huge impact on humanity, as I've talked about in the last few episodes with Johnny Garrett. But it's also had an impact on each of us and each of you who are out there listening to this show. So I thought, let's get an all-star team together like John Bryce, Vinnie Cilurzo, and Jordan Folks and ask each of them how brewing science has impacted their career and also maybe the research that they're interested in for the future. So I thought this would be a great last episode of the Brü Lab, and while I'm sad to see it go, I think you're going to have a lot of fun with this one. But first, if you haven't yet signed up to become a patron, please consider doing so. By becoming a patron of Brülosophy, you get awesome rewards like access to Brülosophy contributor recipes, new discounts each month to YakimaValleyHops.com, and for $3 a month, access to a monthly live Q&A session with a special guest from the brewing industry. Becoming a patron is easy. Once you've contributed at that $3 level or higher, you get access to the private Patreon Facebook page where all of the previous Q&A sessions are available to watch. So guests like Vinnie Cilurzo, who's on this show, John Palmer, the Brülosopher himself, Marshall Schott, and so many others. There are so many more. All of the previous Patreon Q&As are available on that private Patreon Facebook page. And of course, all the information that you need to get access to this awesome resource is available at patreon.com/Brülosophy. Thank you to everybody that's left a rating or review of the show. We made it over 100 ratings on Apple Podcasts, which is awesome. And if you haven't yet left a rating or review on your podcast service of choice, you can still do that even after the show is over. So take a second, let us know what you think of the show, and so that others like you can find this in the future. All right, and feedback this week is the last feedback of the Brü Lab, and it's from me. It's just a reminder that if you like what you heard on this show, don't forget about all the other amazing content that Brülosophy offers. There's the OG website where it all started, offering hundreds of brewing-related experiments where we test variables with a sensory panel to determine whether they're significant. There's the Short and Shoddy series where we see just how far you can push the limits of what's traditionally accepted for brewing great beer, and see if you can can still make great beer using some shortcuts. And then, of course, there's the Brew It Yourself series, which is our version of the traditional recipe homebrew blog where you can get inspiration for your next brew. In addition, there's the OG Brülosophy podcast, which beams out all of that amazing website content straight to your ear and adds a little bit more discussion and detail than we can put on the website. And then, of course, there's the newest addition to the Brülosophy network, which is the Brülosophy show on YouTube. It combines content for your ears and your eyes and explores all kinds of brewing related topics, from process improvements to even the impact of brewing beer in your bathtub. Yeah, that one was my idea, and I'm so glad that Martin decided to actually do that and then serve the beer to people, which was a lot of fun. That was a great episode. All that content is still available to you for free, so I hope you'll check it out. And I also wanted to say a huge thank you to all of the guests who have been part of the show. It's been an honor to get to talk with each of you and share your stories. It's been a pleasure to meet you all in person at different conferences, and I look forward to continuing the relationships that we started here on the show. And finally, a huge thank you to the Brülosopher, Mr. Marshall Schott, for his incredible work in editing and producing all 184 episodes of this podcast. He helped build this incredible brewing science engine that was the Brü Lab and also Brülosophy. So Marshall, I couldn't have made this podcast without your weekly work making the show sound as great as possible and cleaning up all my flubs and errors during recording. So thank you so much for your support, getting this show off the ground and producing over 180 great episodes. All right, on to the interview with John, Vinnie, and Jordan. I'll be right back.
Got great ideas, but no idea how to build a website? Get Bluehost. Their AI design tool creates high-quality WordPress sites super fast. Whether you're a blogger, influencer, or launching a side hustle, Bluehost helps boost your growth with built-in marketing and e-commerce tools. Upgrade to cloud and get 100% uptime and 24/7 security to stay online all the time. Why wait? You've got the vision. Make it real. Visit Bluehost.com to get started.
One of the biggest improvements to my brewing practices was the upgrade to stainless steel, and Delta Brewing Systems offers some of the lowest prices on high-quality stainless gear, like the Firm Tank, which holds 8 gallons or 30 liters of wort, comes with a domed lid to reduce the chances of a messy blow-off, and it can hold up to 4 psi of pressure. Delta Brewing Systems also has their own line of brew kettles, as well as one of the lowest-priced all-in-one electric brew systems out there, and their prices are remarkably affordable. If you're in the market for legit stainless gear that won't break the bank, you've got to check out deltabrewingsystems.com.
You can have it all. Great pay, awesome benefits, a flexible schedule, the chance to grow. At Cox, we're recruiting auto and diesel technicians to join our Mannheim and Fleet Services teams. If you're ready for a new job and want to experience an award-winning workplace, drive your career forward with us. Visit cox.career/autotech to learn more. That's cox.career/autotech.
The most wonderful time of the year. Although, let's be honest, around the holidays, things really add up. But here's the good news. Only at Verizon, you can get a single line for $50 per month when you switch and bring your phone. So while ice skating for 2 is definitely costing more, here at Verizon, you can save. Gifts for your third cousins? Steep. A single line with Verizon? Not so steep. A real tree? Pricey. A single line with Verizon? Less pricey. Flights to see Mima and Pops? Those are up. A $50 per month single line? That's down. Even a trip to the Atlanta Holiday Market will cost you more. But with Verizon, you can switch and bring your phone for just $50 per month for a single line on unlimited welcome, with autopay plus taxes and fees. All this to say, during the holiday season, when everything is costing more, you can get more for less right now at a local Verizon store. $15 monthly promo credits applied over 36 months with a new line on unlimited welcome. In times of congestion, unlimited 5G, 4G LTE may be temporarily slower than other traffic. Domestic data roaming at 2G speeds. Additional terms apply.
As a fledgling homebrewer trying to find ways to make better beer, I often found myself looking into the science behind the things we do as brewers so as to better understand what's actually happening when we, for example, change the mash temperature, or add salts to our brewing water, or why we go to these extreme lengths to avoid oxygen ingress post-fermentation. And the great thing is, there's a lot of brewing science out there to consume, and there are a lot of fantastic brewers who've been using brewing science to make better beer and who are willing to share their ideas and experiences experiences to help make better beer for everyone. With me in the lab today for the last episode of the Brü Lab, I've got two industry veterans and an award-winning homebrewer to talk about how brewing science has impacted their brewing careers. Let's start by introducing John Bryce. John, welcome to the Brü Lab.
Well, thanks for the invitation, Cade. This should be fun. You know, I've hosted a lot of podcast interviews, but this is only the second time I've been a guest on another show. So
no way.
I'm excited to be here, especially in such good company.
Oh my gosh, that's incredible. I can't believe that you've only been a guest twice. John, of course, is host of the MBAA podcast, which has definitely had an impact on the availability of brewing science to the masses. And so, John, actually, how many episodes of the MBAA podcast have been produced to date?
We are up to 323 now. That's a number that I never would have imagined hitting back when the show started in 2016. And I should mention that most of those episodes would never have happened without the team that supports me in the background. That's not only the volunteer members of the Master Brewers Podcast Working Group, but also friends like the guy you're about to introduce, who has been the silent secret weapon behind some of our best episodes.
Yeah. Well, and I am excited to introduce Vinnie in just a second. But yeah, you're totally right. 330 episodes. I can't even imagine the amount of time that's taken from you and the team that's doing it. And of course, one of the reasons that we're ending the Brü Lab podcast is that amount of time that it's had on me, which is unfortunate. But, you know, it was a good thing, 180 episodes. And I think this is going to be a great one, in part because, hey, we've got Vinnie Cilurzo on this episode as well. Vinnie, of course, is co-owner of the Russian River Brewing Company, makers of some of the best beers in America. Vinnie, welcome to the lab.
Thank you. It's great to finally make it on. We've talked about this many a times, and really happy to be here. I'm a frequent listener and appreciate all that you and Jordan have contributed. I also listen to John regularly as well.
Yeah, of course. Yeah, I'm excited to have you on too, Vinnie. I mean, you've been super dedicated to brewing science. I mean, I've known you've done a lot of presentations about it. You've talked a lot about the experiments you've done there at Russian River and around. But I had sort of a question for you to start off, Vinnie, is when you started brewing, was it easy to get access to brewing science?
Yeah, that's a good one.
I think he just called you old, Vinnie.
Yeah. No. I started homebrewing in 1989. That was when I started homebrewing. I was 19 years old. I beat the system, although I grew up in a winery, so my folks let my sister and I have a little bit of wine here and there. But, there was a few books. Obviously, there was Charlie Papazian's, Complete Joy of Homebrewing. I actually dug up a few of the books, and I looked up on the date that it was published. So I've got the cool the Treatise of Lager Brewing by Fred Eckhart. That was 1972.
Wow. Yeah.
Of Portland, Oregon fame.
Yep, of course. Fred was an amazing person and friend. Yeah, the big Book of Brewing, 1985. This other one just was Making Beer, 89. One that I relied on quite a bit was the Complete Handbook of Homebrewing, 1988, by a guy named Dave Miller. And that was a pretty good book. I remember using that along with the Charlie Papazian's book. But the one writer who, if you wanted technical stuff, and his books are still relevant, is George Fix. And his wife Lori co-wrote sometimes. And his first one, I think, came out in 89. And I was lucky enough to become friends with George and Lori before George passed away too early. And the only other thing I'll add, those early days, was Zymergy, of course. And there was, for a hot minute, there was a school magazine called Brewing Techniques. And that was a pretty good magazine. And then homebrew clubs. It always brings me joy when I hear Jordan talk about his homebrew club every once in a while, that there's still some homebrew clubs going. But that was really where you went to, truly, for that collaborative spirit and learning, was the homebrew club.
Yeah, so it's amazing that there were a lot of those books available at the time that you were able to turn to and actually investigate and do brewing science. But yeah, like you just mentioned, knowing people like your homebrew club and stuff, talking to those people, that to me was one of the biggest influences in my appreciation for brewing science. And I think that's a great transition too, because last but not least, we have Brülosophy contributor, co-host of the Applying the Science episodes of the Brü Lab, and of course, gold medal award-winning homebrewer, Jordan Folks. Jordan, welcome as a guest of the Brü Lab.
Yeah, it's fun to be on the other side of the mic, and very stoked to be here with Vinnie and John.
Yeah, and Jordan, we've talked about it a ton on the show before, but would you say that understanding the science has made you a better brewer?
Without a doubt. When you first get in, you're just trying to figure out how to add grains to hot water or powder to hot water at that point, right? And so
Yeah.
Once you start getting into the details and learning so much of the science via the books that Vinnie mentioned, you really come a long way. And I really think that homebrewers can make just as good of beer as people like Vinnie are making at home.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, I think I don't know if I can make as good a beer as Vinny. I'm not going to go that far, but or John or you, Jordan, for that matter. I'm probably the least good at making beer of everybody that's on this episode. But yeah, I mean, it is really amazing, and it's cool too to hear people like Vinny and John. I don't know. Did you start as a home brewer too, or did you start straight as in the brewing industry?
My start was a little weird. I actually had a little taste of commercial brewing before home brewing. I did like a real brief internship in a few commercial breweries and really fell in love with it. The whole process, having a tangible product at the end of the day, the aromas, the mystery, the science, everything. I loved it. And as soon as I did that, I knew that's what I wanted to do. And so then I started home brewing like crazy because I wanted to learn.
Yeah. I mean, I love it. Everybody, commercial brewers are home brewers at heart. And I think, we talked about Jordan a few episodes back about going to breweries and telling them, hey, I home brew, and just seeing, people behind the bar, especially if they're brewers, their eyes light up. Right. And it's like, oh yes. Okay, great. I can share, we can talk. This will be fun.
Someone that will actually buy my porter.
Yeah, exactly. Right. Someone that, or someone that understands why I've got a porter and not just an IPA or a lager or something on here, but yeah, it's fantastic what homebrewing has provided here. And of course, a big piece of that is learning how to brew, right? Like John's just saying, he has started brewing like crazy to understand, what he has to do to brew. And a lot of that is experience, but a lot of that is reading and studying and learning and trial and error and experiments and all of these things that are brewing science. And so as we do this last episode, an homage or an ode to brewing science, we have to start just sort of at the highest level. So I'll ask each of you, but I'll start with you, Vinny. How has brewing science impacted you?
Yeah, first off, that's it's foundational to our business, for Natalie and I, as business owners. I mean, we're going to make 45 or 46,000 barrels this year, so we're not small anymore. You can't just fly by the seat of your pants, and so you need to have a dedicated lab and brewing program that keeps that consistency. And but with that said, there is that artistry of brewing as well that we all love. And I was thinking about this just the other day, actually, and we've got this new hop called Tangier that I rubbed it in the field, and it was like, oh, this is amazing, being grown by our friends at Siegel Ranch, and it's got this really great orange quality. It's like cutting into a fresh orange, and but you're not going to know, how it's going to interact until we brew with it, with say like Simcoe or something that we use a lot of. So there is this intersection between art and science that we're always, that's sort of the crossroads, and we're trying to pull from a little bit of both, but at the same time, as a professional brewer, the brewing science is going to tell us every once in a while, it's like, this batch isn't good. You need to dump it just to protect your reputation. And I remember years ago doing a presentation at a California Craft Brewers Association event, and it was a lab quality thing. And I mentioned will you dump a batch of beer? I kind of challenged the audience, and a couple of years later, some guy came up to me. He was like, I dumped my batch of beer. He was so proud of it in the sense of it protected the reputation of his brewery that he worked at. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and with 9,000 craft breweries out there too, right? I mean, reputation's everything at this point. Yeah. I mean, there's so many breweries out there that are making good beer, but could be better or could be great, or any of those things. And that's where, like you said, at some point you got to look at the science and see what it's telling you. But John, how about you? How has brewing science impacted you?
So I'm definitely not a scientist, and when I first started brewing without a scientific background or training, brewing was very mysterious, which was exciting. But I like to know how things work and I like process improvement. So learning about biochemistry and microbiology was the key that slowly unlocked one mystery after another. And it didn't take me long to realize that while ignorance may have been bliss in the beginning, it was a lot more fulfilling to make better beer by applying the brewing science that I was learning. And it was clear that there was this lifetime of science to learn because there's a lot of complexity in brewing, but also there's still plenty that we don't know yet. And there's always someone studying something about brewing that will eventually lead to new knowledge that a practical brewer like me can apply to his or her process. So that journey of learning was really what propelled me forward and kept me interested.
Yeah, I love that. That's, I think, one of my favorite things too about science is that understanding or the exploration of things that we don't know, right? I always tell my son, my son asks me, he's 6 now, and he always asks me, like, you're watching shows that, oh, magic, does magic exist? You know, can we magic things? And I'm always like, yeah, magic is all around us. Anything that we don't understand is magic, right? At the end of the day, it's just magic. Like, brewers 1,000 years ago didn't understand that, you know, using the equipment that you brewed the last batch of beer with contained yeast. They just knew that it made better beer when you did that. And so, yeah, okay. Or the magic stick that used to be hung over the mantle places at different inns. We've heard that story as well, too. It is cool, and I do love that about the exploration of brewing science. And okay, Jordan, how about you? How's brewing science impacted you?
It's really helped me make great beer at the homebrew level. You know, in John's podcast, he's talking about a lot of industrial process things that may not be relevant at the homebrew level, but there's a lot of really important scientific things that we can engage with. And as if we understand that, we can make really great beer. Things like fermentation, you know, yeast health, cold side oxidation, et cetera. And so it's through those things that once they start to understood, you know, fermentation temperature matters, yeast pitch rate matters. Those kind of things have helped me make great beer. And then I think also from kind of the commercial side of things, they're using brewing science or, you know, hop science, et cetera, to make really cool advanced products that are starting to make it into the homebrew level. And so if it wasn't for those scientific endeavors, we wouldn't have dialyzed yeast. We wouldn't have, you know, flowable hop products. And as a homebrewer, being able to use those, we're able to replicate these really amazing beers, especially at the hoppy side. And it's really thanks to science as to why we have access to that.
Yeah, I mean, geez, like the thiolized yeast, I mean, the euphorics, the hop kicks, the advanced hop products that we have access to now. Yeah, none of that was even there whenever I started homebrewing, right? I mean, all that stuff is there. And Vinny, I mean, I think you were one of the first people to actually embrace and use advanced hop products in your beer.
Yeah, on the craft level, definitely just good old fashioned hop extract. And, that was in the late 90s at our original location when the brewery was out at Corbell. And I remember our sales guy for Yakima Chief, Gerard Lemons, was pushing, just the old fashioned pure resin CO2 extract for bittering. And I was using it, and then I was like, but don't tell anyone. I was almost ashamed of it. And then I realized how great it could be in, the reducing green matter, getting better yields, better flavor profile, more efficient bittering, and all these things. And, now you certainly couldn't get those things, for a home brewer, but now, you can buy little syringe vials of it and shoot it into your beer. And that's really cool, to see that, you can buy some of these advanced hop products for homebrewers.
Yeah, I mean, it's this cool place for experimentation, right? It's this amazing place where it's like you said, Vinny, dumping a beer, right? Dumping 5 gallons, even at a homebrewer level, still feels like, oh, I really don't want to do that. But it's only 5 gallons. It's not, 100 barrels or 20 barrels or any of that, right?
Yeah. So, and I also want to add that I sometimes just walk into our cellar, and I love doing it on like a weekend when it's quiet, or you just look at a bucket and it's fermenting, and the CO2 is gassing off. And you sometimes just think about it like, that's really cool that, we are making this happen. We've created this product and this fermentation, or even better, going into our open top fermenter rooms and watching the bubbles, and you can hear it just a little bit. Sometimes just that simplicity of what fermentation is, we shouldn't overlook that, what we're doing here. It's pretty cool what we make.
Yeah, that's even, brewing beers for a research perspective, where we're measuring like OG and, we're measuring gravity and everything, at 8-hour intervals. I still get that sense of relief when I see the bubbles, coming out of the airlock. It's like, okay, all right, everything's going to be okay. Yeah, sure. I saw, this gravity's kind of starting to decrease, but okay, we got bubbles now. Fermentation's going. We're good. All right, John, then I wanted to ask a question of you. Was there a moment or a story behind a time that you realized, I love brewing? Or even more specifically, if you have one about brewing science, that's great too. But was there a moment or a story where you just like, I love this?
Well, I probably had a lot of moments like that. I remember going to a Master Brewers District Mid-Atlantic meeting about 20 years ago. Anheuser-Busch, Miller, and Coors all had breweries in our district, and this would have been before InBev bought Anheuser-Busch, and before craft had really taken off. So I was one of 2 or 3 micro brewers who showed up to these meetings, which was pretty intimidating at first, but everyone from the big breweries ended up being incredibly welcoming and willing to help me, which was incredible. Anyway, so I'm sitting through this technical presentation, and someone from one of the big breweries was talking about VDKs, or vicinal diketones. And I knew what diacetyl was at the time, but they were talking about the relationship between diacetyl and another VDK in their beers, how they were measuring this, what it meant for their process, and all this stuff that was just completely over my head. I was by far the dumbest guy in the room, but it was exciting because, again, I realized how much more there was to learn, and that there was this really cool community of people who were willing to help me do that.
Yeah. That community aspect of it, man, that just keeps coming up. And I feel like that's going to come up throughout the show, right? The MBAA community, the homebrew community, the commercial brewers, CBC, even, Brewers Association, all that stuff. That community aspect has been key. But it's cool, right? The reason I bring up community is this is a giant brewery sharing information. Right. We've got, like I said, Vinnie at Russian River. We've got you, John, MBAA podcast, and also doing technical brewing yourself. Jordan, a home brewer, and everybody's on here saying, this is how I make great beer. Do it too. And I love that about it. Going to MBAA meetings, going to ASPC meetings, going to Brewing Summit, WBC, EBC, all these different conferences, even the American Homebrewing Conference, right? And GABF and CB. I mean, it's just so much fun to go and learn all those presentations. But I digress. All right, Jordan, how about you? Do you have a moment or a story where you realized you love brewing?
Well, I kind of fell backwards into home brewing. I had a roommate that got a home brewing kit for Christmas, and I was like, well, I live here, I'll watch. And quickly his equipment became mine. And so the bug hit me immediately, and I just love the kind of culinary arts meets science meets hobby. It just really was a good fit for me. And I think that in terms of like the brewing science, what really clicked for me was the yeast book by Chris White. That book I was homebrewing when that book came out, and it really is when it started to all click for me, and I started to better understand the science and moving it from magic to more of like a scientific process.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, totally. That one was pivotal for me too. Whenever I started working at Blue Owl, which is a sour brewery in Austin, on the second day that I was there, I remember I was a lawyer, so I had no training. The second day that I was there, the head brewer comes to me and he hands me the yeast book, and he says, "Here, you have to read this. Just read this whole book, and then we'll talk about other things." Of course, I'd been brewing for 7 or 8 years. I knew things about yeast, but yeah, that was pivotal. Vinnie, how about you? A moment that you realized you love brewing?
That was my very first homebrew. This sounds like totally like a cliche,
no,
but
not at all.
It was my first homebrew, 1989. The beer did not turn out, but that almost didn't matter. It was that really magic, the alchemy of it, and I just knew that that's what I wanted to do the rest of my life. And mind you, at the time I was, for the most part, helping out in my parents' winery that I grew up in. So I had a fermentation background.
Yeah.
But beer was this thing that was like, oh, this is cool. I can make an ale in 2 or 3 weeks, and takes 12 months, 18 months or whatever, even longer to make wine. And that was it. And and then over time, trial and error, reading a lot of books, my beer got pretty good. And from the brewing science standpoint, luckily being in California, I was able to go up to UC Davis and take these weekend short courses or 1 week classes with Dr. Lewis back before he retired, and those were really foundational. Kind of like John going to an MBAA meeting, I'd sit through some of these classes, these seminars, and I had no idea what they were talking about. But at the same time, you don't know what you don't know, until you know it. So that was really, really cool. And it's funny now, because now I get to go speak at like the Master Brewers class at Davis every year. And usually I do something on hop creep now, but it's been on all kinds of topics. So it's cool to come full circle like that.
Hey, Vinnie, I'm curious, do you remember what your first homebrew was? And I'm kind of curious, like, what the evolution for you was into getting into hoppy beer, because it seems that you've been really influential in the, explosion of hoppy beer in the world. And I'm kind of curious, like, where your homebrewing journey fit into that.
It was an extract kit from this little homebrew shop in El Cajon, San Diego, called Beer and Wine Craft. Owen and Audrey was this older couple that owned it and ran the shop. And my buddy Dennis and I would go to the homebrew shop, and we started all grain brewing within like our second or third brew. Like that was immediate. And probably IPA started figuring into the homebrews in the early 90s. And what eventually became my Blind Pig IPA recipe at the Blind Pig Brewery was that homebrew recipe that I just brewed over and over and over again. And that was, Cascade, hops, Chinook. Centennial hadn't even come out yet until 1994. Columbus came out somewhere around there. And so eventually those hops worked their way in as well. But, probably not much different from when John started brewing the early part of his career as well. Jordan, when you mentioned the yeast book, it reminded me of this book that Chris White wrote with Yusuf Cherny, who was one of the guys that ran Ballast Point for years. But it was this little yeast book pamphlet that they wrote called The Fungus Among Us. And when I was looking through some of those old homebrew books, I actually saw it on my bookshelf here in my office. So if Chris or Yusuf listen to this, I'm sure they'll get a chuckle out of that.
Yeah, that's one so Jeff Clausen, the brewer here at Oregon State, or the brewery manager, he's got that book as well, a little pamphlet that's like sitting on his shelf. So I was nodding along whenever I saw that. But you said it was cliche that it was that first homebrew batch, but Vinnie, my story is very similar, right? A buddy of mine knew I was interested in cooking, and he gave me a Mr. Beer kit, which is a little plastic 2-gallon, essentially it's a carboy, but it's in the shape of a firkin, and that batch was not good. And I remember I have this very vivid memory of like trying to give it to one of my friends. And I said, hey, here, try this. I just made it. And he said, no, not my style, which is a really, really polite way of saying, no, that beer sucks. It's really not good, and I don't want to drink that. But I was like, I don't care. I love this. So not cliche at all. That's a fun one.
I remember when I was first really just homebrewing like crazy, and I needed more buckets, because I'm like, okay, we're going to make this operation bigger, right? And the whole kitchen turns into a brewery. And I remember going around to some local restaurants that had these like pickle buckets that they would get rid of, right? And I was like, I'll just use those, and I had read somewhere that you could, use bleach or something and like get them really clean. And boy, all that beer turned into pickle beer. It was so bad.
Pickle beer.
You did it before it was cool.
Yeah. Trust me, it wasn't cool.
Yep. Yeah, I still have the bucket. Everybody's got a stack of buckets, right? There's just a stack of buckets everywhere. And finding those, yeah, I love it. The other thing too is the spray bottle of sanitizer. That's one that I just always have around, that spray bottle of sanitizer. But Jordan, you mentioned the yeast book, and so the next question I was going to ask is there a topic that you would describe as pivotal? Meaning, like, if I hadn't learned this, or if I hadn't studied this, I wouldn't have been able to do that or make this beer or something like that.
Yeah, I mean, I think at the homebrew level and probably the pro level as well, is it all starts with fermentation. You have to have, high quality fermentations for anything subsequently downstream to matter. I think that you could probably have a pretty lame recipe. As long as your fermentation is good, it's going to be a pretty good beer. You could have the best recipe in the world, but if your fermentation is crap, then the beer is crap. So I think that's really the foundational thing for a home brewer, is understanding that. Then you can start to get into worrying about, Lodo or this or that. I think that it really all starts with fermentation.
Yeah, that's a good one. How about you, Vinny?
I'm going to kind of take it to something more recently, and that was the really learning about hop creep. As an IPA brewery, I mean, 80% of the beer we make is IPA. In Pliny the Elder is more than 50% alone. And I remember Jason Perkins from Allagash calling me even before he had talked to Tom Shellhammer about it, asking about, do a secondary fermentation, which they're like, yeah, we see it, but I don't know why it happens or whatever. But yeah. I'm thinking specifically in like 2018 to 2020, we were into our new facility here, which is now 6 years old in Windsor, and we were just getting crushed by hop creep. And it was like, we really need to get down and dirty, learn this. Our overall capacity was dropping because the beers were taking forever, to clear diacetyl. And, and we were using so much ALDC. I saw how much we were spending annually. And it was like, I swear hop creep was actually invented by the makers of ALDC because they're laughing to the bank, with all the profits they're making off ALDC. So, but I say that jokingly, but yeah, that was really an area that affected us. We looked at yeast nutrient, which is technically fermentation health, which Jordan mentioned. I also remember listening actually to an MBAA podcast with John, and he had the great Joe Hertrick on, who is some of the absolute best podcasts on the MBAA platform. John had Joe on, and he said something that I knew, but I had forgotten, that you're not going to really clear diacetyl if your pH is too high. And of course our pH was going up from dry hopping, and so that kind of led us down this road to start adjusting pH on the cold side. And it just was this kind of foundational moment that really helped us at least get hop creep in check. And now, through all that research and just studying and reading and listening to other folks and calling friends, that community that you talked about, we really have a handle on it. Of course, we have hop creep, but it's almost fully predictable now.
Right. Which is cool, right? Yeah, it's like once we understand something, learn how to control it, right? Understand what's going on and what's happening, and then figure out how to control it or mitigate it. That's the evolution of the brewer, right? But it's interesting too that came in 2018, right? You'd been brewing for quite a while, successfully brewing for quite a while.
Yeah, we saw hop creep back in like 2008, which is kind of when Allagash first saw it, but it didn't seem to rear its head as much. But I can look back and find reasons why that was, just the way that our cycle times worked on our beers. And maybe I didn't quite know everything, or I didn't know everything then that I know now. And so, we would just have longer tank times, and it was just kind of taking care of itself,
Yeah. And then how about you, John? Was there a pivotal topic that you had that you realized?
Malting. Brewing is just a continuation of the malting process, and it's impossible to fully understand brewing without studying malting.
Oh man, I you know what? I couldn't have asked for better answers on that, right? We got a yeast one, a hop one, and a malt one, right? and no, we did not plan this ahead of time. This was totally spontaneous. So that's fantastic. And I love those, right? That's been one of the things from the Brü Lab is malting. Like I didn't really think about malting as an enzymatic process, right? As like you said, brewing is an extension of malting. It's continuing those enzymes that are starting in malting and going on. There's a flavor component to it too. I don't want that to get lost, but you can't make beer without those enzymes. And that's a great one of the things that I've really appreciated here through the Brü Lab. Yeah, and so I think that's a good spot for us to stop and take a break. We're going to come back and talk about where we get our science, but I also want to learn if there are any research projects that you guys have been involved in that you've been pretty excited about. It sounds like Vinnie has really used the hop creep research that he's been a part of, so I'm curious to ask you other guys about that. But let's take a quick break and we'll be right back. We all know that designing recipes is really fun, and doing it well is so much easier with good software. We at Brülosophy recently made the switch to Brewfather, and honestly, y'all, we could not be happier. Brewfather utilizes the latest technology to bring you the most robust cloud-based recipe design software that can be accessed anywhere, on your phone, tablet, desktop, and even offline. It also works seamlessly with numerous third-party devices to make it easier to monitor every step of your brew. I know change can be difficult, but trust me when I say you need to go to brewfather.app today to try it out for yourself. That's brewfather.app.
Got great ideas, but no idea how to build a website? Get Bluehost. Their AI design tool creates high-quality WordPress sites super fast. Whether you're a blogger, influencer, or launching a side hustle, Bluehost helps boost your growth with built-in marketing and e-commerce tools. Upgrade to cloud and get 100% uptime and 24/7 security to stay online all the time. Why wait? You've got the vision. Make it real. Visit Bluehost.com to get started.
Established in 1995, More Beer has been consistently serving the greater brewing community since the times IPA was expected to be bitter and clear, and there are reasons they've stuck around so long. In addition to their massive product selection and excellent customer service, More Beer has locations on both the West and the East Coast of the United States, which translates into fast shipping times regardless of where you live. And when you spend more than $59, shipping is free. When you're in need of brewing ingredients and gear, there's no better option than morebeer.com, one of the most trusted shops on the planet.
You can have it all. Great pay, awesome benefits, a flexible schedule, the chance to grow. At Cox, we're recruiting auto and diesel technicians to join our Mannheim and Fleet Services teams. If you're ready for a new job and want to experience an award-winning workplace, drive your career forward with us. Visit cox.career/autotech to learn more. That's cox.career/autotech.
The Brü Lab was founded as a way to get brewing science out of the lab and into the hands and ears of people who can use it, and we focus pretty heavily on the science. But one of the reasons we could dedicate a whole podcast to the subject is because of the sheer volume of science that's generated through beer. I mean, there's a crap load, okay? And it would take a career to even scratch the surface, or to even, you could just pick one topic and spend your entire life researching it, learning about the science, and never get there. So I thought we can't have an homage to brewing science without talking about where do we get that info from? What do we do with it whenever we find it? And, there's a bunch of different places. Vinnie had mentioned the books that he had that were pivotal to him whenever he started. But I kind of wanted to start in this area and ask, and I think I got to start with you, John, because you are a significant source of brewing science for people. But where do you get your brewing science information?
Oh, man. So I guess going back to early days, Wolfgang Kuntz's book became a go-to early in my career. I actually got to meet him at VLB, and he signed a copy for me.
Oh, wow.
Master Brewers district meetings have always been a great source, not just the presentations at the meetings, but also, as Vinny's alluded to, the friends I've made through the friends I've met through those meetings who've just become a tremendous resource. There's also the MBA's Ask the Brewmasters forum, which I convinced the leadership to create back in 2015. That one's unique because it's moderated for technical accuracy, whereas there's a lot of other places on the internet where the blind are sort of leading the blind, so to speak. These days, really doing the Master Brewers podcast interviews is really kind of my main source and exposure to brewing science outside of attending the occasional district meeting or brewing summit.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's going to be one thing I miss about the Brü Lab, right? Is it's all the times, like all these conversations just sitting around with Tom or the other people in the lab where they're talking about like, oh, there's this thing. And I'm like, oh yeah, I remember Laura Burns said that on this episode, or John had this episode on the Master Brewers podcast or whatever. I mean, there's been so many times that that's happened. But yeah, Jordan, how about you? Where do you get your brewing science information from?
It's really incredible how much it's evolved since I started homebrewing, 14 years ago or so. Back then you had to get a book. There were some forums online, but YouTube wasn't even as, prolific as it is today, and just in terms of general content, let alone homebrewing content. So now there's so many websites and YouTube shows and podcasts, and it's really transformed to a more digital experience. These days, like John's podcast and what's really been enjoyable actually is the more anecdotal stuff, hearing from professional brewers like Vinnie, what they're experimenting with, and kind of bringing that into my home brewery as a way to tinker with things. That's been really inspiring. And I definitely give a lot of credit to the pro brewers that are blazing the trail and helping us home brewers kind of hack it on our little homebrew systems.
Well, yeah, and of course too for you, Vinnie, as a home brewer as a commercial brewer that is blazing the trail, like a source of a lot of the science, like you mentioned in Hop Creep. Where are you getting your science information from?
Yeah, I do listen to a good amount of podcasts. Kind of a lot of it starts there. Same stuff that John mentioned, MBAA, the Technical Quarterly. Obviously. The MBA podcast, this one, and a couple others. And I have a pretty good library of books that I still reference, that are great to go to. And, the ASBC also has some great articles and whatnot that have been really been good for us at the brewery.
Yeah, it is interesting to hear, Jordan say like a digital experience, because I can certainly start to see that trend. Right. I mean, it was very much like print magazines and books for a long time. I think for all of us starting, it was before really the internet had brewing information. For Jordan and I, maybe the like AHA forums or something, or what was it? What was that one? Homebrew forum? That was it. Homebrew Talk. There we go. That was it. Right. I mean, that one. But like John pointed out, the source of the information is so important, right? Because how many times did you see something on one of those forums that you're just like, I don't think that's right. They're like, yeah, I just open up the bucket and leave it open during, bottling or whatever. And, I don't bottle on foam. I leave a 2-inch headspace in the bottle, oof. As we think about that now, like, oh my gosh, the amount of oxygen you'd be getting in there would just be crazy. But yeah, and one of the things too, so Vinnie, this may be then a question for you too, again, as a source of some of this stuff. A lot of it seems like to me that is okay, I read this, but now I need to try it for myself. Right. And so if you say like listen to a podcast episode or read an article or something like that and think, I need to try this, how do you do it?
So we're lucky enough to have a 5-barrel pilot brewery, and I personally run that myself. That still gets me brewing. I get to brew probably 40 or 45 batches a year in there.
Fun. That's a good amount.
Which is a good amount, yeah. And, on occasion we'll bring over, beer like green Pliny the Elder, and we do some sort of dry hop experiment, something like that. So it doesn't technically, it's not an actual brew on the brew kit, but that's really the foundation of how we run trials, do stuff, R&D. Perfect example is and before I give this example, it's rare that we're actually like creating a new recipe. We're usually like trying an ingredient, whether it's hop, grain, yeast, and then, or a concept or a practice or something, and then we'll maybe apply that to a beer, down the line, whatever it is. But a recent example was earlier this year, we brewed with a 5,000-year-old ancient African grain called Fonio. And it was part of a global collaboration with Brooklyn Brewery and a few other breweries, including Carlsberg and Guinness, that Brooklyn had in on the collaboration. And, before we used the Fonio grain on our 20-barrel or our 75-barrel brew house, we made beer in the pilot brewery, and then it went from there. So that's exactly where we apply some of these things that we learn from other brewers or hear on a podcast or read in an article or whatnot.
Yeah.
How frequently are you dumping from the pilot system? Or are you guys pretty liberal about serving in the tap room?
Most of it runs through the tap room, and we built a brand that's R&D. So capital R, lowercase n as in and then big D, so R&D. And so anything that says R&D in the pub typically came out of the pilot brewery, meaning I made it. We do have it out in the marketplace, and every once in a while a beer will make it out to the marketplace, and we'll brew that on the big system. We just actually we don't make a lot of hazy IPA, but we just released a second one that was an R&D beer, and it was actually using over 100-year-old hop variety, Brewer's Gold, that working with CLS Farms, they're like growing it in a more modern and killing it in a more modern technique, and then we're applying more modern, brewing techniques like mid-fermentation, dry hop, that sort of thing. Turns out it's an amazing hop for hazy beers, and if you pick it later and treat it differently than how it was treated before, it really makes incredible beer. And, this is this hop that it's probably the most important hop out there foundationally, other than maybe its mother, which was named BB1, because it's touched so many hops: Chinook, Galena, Nugget, Centennial, Sterling, Crystal. All of those have lineage back to Brewer's Gold, but most important is Citra. 19% of Citra is Brewer's Gold. So those are the fun things that, that's a project that was just a little pet project of mine, that I just didn't want people to forget about this hop and how important it is that we use the pilot brewery for. But we'll blend, to go back to your question, Jordan, we'll blend a lot of stuff away. Just yesterday, I kegged a beer that's just going to get blended away on the big brew house. 5 barrels in a 300-barrel tank is nothing. So.
Yeah, Jordan, that's funny. I remember last week on the Applying the Science episode, or 2 weeks ago on that Applying the Science episode, where we talked about learnings from the Brü Lab. The last question that we talked about was, if you had to brew a beer using learnings from the Brü Lab, what would you have brewed? And I was just listening to Vinnie say that, and I heard mid-fermentation dry hopping, I heard maturity, I heard kilning temperatures, I heard an ancient hop that hasn't been used in a long time that's now being used, biotransformation, all these things. And we've had Brü Lab episodes on all of that. I mean, Lindsay Rubottom's kilning work. We had Stacey Williams with New Belgium doing mid-fermentation dry hopping. I did some maturity work with hop creep, and we had all these topics. The only thing was there wasn't a GMO yeast in there, which is okay. That's all right, or a unique grain, right? But it is cool to hear like that. All that is a result of science, right? All that is a result of tweaking these different variables and then finding a new way to use an old ingredient, which is awesome. Now, John, I haven't asked you that question too. Let's say, you hear something or interview a guest and you're like, oh, I want to try this. So how do you go about that?
Yeah, all those things have happened before. It really depends on the size of the brewery and the risk level, right? So sometimes I really miss working in a larger brewery where you can do legitimate trials and make small changes, and then, like Vinny said, blend it away across multiple tanks. But in a pub brewery, I also love scenarios where I can just split a batch of wort and make 2 very different beers while trying something new. So, it really just depends on the scenario. I've worked in a lot of different breweries of different sizes and shapes, and they all kind of come with different constraints around that level of innovation.
Totally. Yeah, totally. And different levels of commitment to it too, right? I mean, different levels of people that are doing that. And then, but Jordan, as a home brewer, you've got incredible flexibility. You can try anything you want, anytime you want to, right? It's just you, and you're brewing it for yourself.
Back in the day, before I was involved in Brülosophy, I would frequently try to think of a way to make 2 beers in one, right? So different dry hops or different fermentation, yeast or what have you. But now, being part of Brülosophy, is I do this pretty regularly, and we'll then change some sort of variable, controlling everything else to as tightest as we can, and then serve it to blind tasters and run a triangle test and see if it actually makes a difference. And it's a really amazing things that you would really think people could taste the difference on that they can't, or random things that people can. I'm curious, Vinny and John, do you guys have much experience with these kind of like randomized control kind of triangle test trials?
Yeah, we have some stuff we do on occasion. In fact, we just finished one, and we did it in sensory, and then we actually had them on in our pubs. I think we're just running out where I brewed a batch in the pilot brewery of an Alrawaka beer, the New Zealand hop. Yeah. And then there's a new hop out that it's its daughter, NZH 106. That's a decent replacement. And we wanted to see side by side. And then it ended up in sensory in a triangle test. Our lab manager ran it in there. So we do a little bit of that. And then lately we've been testing a new high oil, dry hop extract from Abstracts. They're Quantum Bright. And that's same thing there. We did some triangle tests with that as well.
Yeah, I think kind of similar. I think really only some of the larger breweries I've worked at that we had capacity to do something like that. We did have it's been a while, but we did an episode. I forget who it was, but we talked a little bit about this idea of how can you bring consumer testing down to the level that will work for you, even in the smallest of brew pubs and that kind of thing. And so I think for a long time, I probably assumed that this was only possible in a larger brewery, but I think there's a lot of tools now, especially with different software and stuff, that make it really pretty easy for even the smallest of breweries to get some sensory analysis feedback, whether it's from their customers or the handful of people who work there or both. So I think that's exciting. And I think more breweries should probably leverage that than they are right now.
Yeah, I remember that episode because I remember, I think it might have been you, John, or certainly at least you or one of your guests that made that comment. It's like, it's surprising the number of breweries that aren't doing some sort of like basic sensory like that, and I don't mean to say like basic sensory, that aren't doing some sort of sensory like, hey, is this better? Is this true to brand? Does this taste good? Should I be serving this to somebody? I mean, for a lot of breweries, the economics of it are, I brewed the beer, I have to sell it, right? And I got to sell it now. I have to sell it yesterday. It's kind of amazing. I remember that episode because I remember that takeaway, and I remember thinking it's really cool as a home brewer because you get to do that. And one of the episodes we did with Maria Mutziglu, who's a scientist at Molson Coors, she talked about this benchtop assay for trying a whole bunch of different yeasts, right? And I mean, Molson Coors isn't out there trying a whole lot of different yeasts, right? But craft brewers can do all kinds of different things. If you want to try a thiolized yeast, but you don't want to make a whole big batch, you can do some benchtop fermentations and just smell what comes out, right? It was pretty cool, and how scalable that stuff is really fun as well. That kind of leads me into another question that I wanted to ask you guys. I wanted to ask if there was a research project that you guys were a part of that you really enjoyed being a part of, or maybe that was your favorite brewing research project that you've done. And Vinny, you've already shared a couple of the ones that you've done, so maybe I'll start with the other two guys first while you think about it. But John, how about you? Has there been a research project that's been your favorite to be a part of?
Yeah. So when I was in brewing school, we had this research project where we did an analysis on a new 2-row winter barley, because at the time there were some concerns with the supply of 2-row spring varieties in Germany. And after the barley analysis, we malted it. And then after the malt analysis, we used that malt to brew pills alongside a control that was brewed with a widely available commercial pills malt made from spring barley. We had to write 2 big papers during that project, one after the malting part and then another after all the beer analysis. And that project was just tons of fun. I learned so much. And then I got to present that work at the 2009 Brewing Summit, which was also a great experience.
Nice. And yeah, cool. And I mean, winter barley, that's, going to be one of the futures as we deal with climate change, right? Spring barley has got a whole lot of water capacity that it's got to deal with. And if you can use winter rains and spring rains and stuff to irrigate, that was another episode where I talked with Campbell Morrissey and Harmony Bettenhausen about those. So that's pretty cool to hear. How about you, Jordan?
So I've done a lot of research experiments in beer since I've been involved with Brülosophy. And I think I want to go back to my very first one that we ever published, which was actually inspired by a podcast that John did, as well as interviews I've heard with pro brewers like Vinnie around post-boil acidification of dry hopped beer. So John had a guest on that was talking about the science behind that, and that I think the recommendation was for super dry hop beers, you could even go far down as like 4.0 pH pre-fermentation due to the aggressive pH rise associated with the dry hop. So we tested a batch where it was split, where one of the West Coast IPAs was acidified going into fermentation, one was not. And the taste difference was astounding. There was also a clarity difference, which I thought was really interesting, where the post-boil acidified batch got clearer. And it just had this like brighter, more beautiful, representation of the style. And so that one was really transformative for me. And so kind of keeping it full circle here, I'm curious, Vinnie, you mentioned cold side acidification for hoppy beers. Could you maybe talk a little bit more about what you've learned on that and as it relates to dry hop creep, I guess, as well?
Yeah. In fact, you guys had a string of episodes that were kind of hop creep focused. I think it was around when I think the first one, Cade, was maybe when you did your master's dissertation, and then it kind of led into a few other episodes. And I think you had Tom Shellhammer on, and so yeah, we know for sure that we get about 0.1 to 0.14 points of pH scale rise per pound per barrel of dry hop, somewhere in that range. And, so if you're dry hopping at like 5 pound per barrel equivalent, it can really jump up. And so that was one of the ways that we, kind of tightened up our tank time, was by making this addition at the tank after primary fermentation, but before the dry hops go in. So we're just basically lowering it. It works out to be about 15 to 25 mLs of food grade phosphoric acid per barrel of beer. Your mileage may vary because it's going to depend on your dry hop load, how many pounds per barrel you're adding. Obviously, the lower that number, the less adjustment you need to make. We've tested it on both sides, and we do make a hot side addition in the whirlpool, but we do tend to do a second one as well in the tank. And what this has done is it's really significantly lowered our reliance on ALDC, and it's made our tank turns go a lot faster, and in general has just made better beer for us, and I'm really thrilled. And that's definitely when I think about some of the projects we've done at the brewery, that's one that has directly impacted our production. The other one that I'll key on is a few years ago we looked at the seeds in hop, and it was our hop seed project, and it was something that Val Peacock had mentioned at a hop quality group meeting several years ago, that you guys really should be looking at the seeds. And there was only a few of us, in the organization that were using whole cone hops. And although we use ours on the hot side, we have a whole bunch of them sitting around, so it was easy to do the research. And we took hops and we separated out the bracts and the seeds, and then we did separate dry hops. And in short, we figured out that the seeds contain the hop seeds contain the enzymes as well, that are in the bract. And so when Natalie and I go into hop selection each year, we literally sit there, and if we have a brewer's cut in front of us and there's seeds, I'm like making a pile of seeds, and I'll usually hand it to the manager or the owner of the farm and be like, dude, you got too many seeds in your hops. It's but Natalie gets a little embarrassed when I do that, but I've trained her too. She's the same way. But the cool thing to where that led was then we said, well, God, I wonder if you then pluck the bract off, so the leaf off the strig being the kind of stem, if you will. What if you just dry hop with the strig? So, I guess you'd call that dry strigging. And we got hop creep there as well. So, the enzymes are all through it. It's in the seed, it's in the bract, it's in the strig itself. That's the next thing we want to do, is actually do it as one whole test to start seeing percentage wise. And I think that would be an interesting project for a master's student or something in the future, to see, like, is there more coming from one place or the other? Is there a correlation? Can you even control it? Of course, every hop is going to have a strig and the bract and all that. But is there more hop creep coming from a hop that's longer, that's bigger, that's got a bigger strig compared to the leaf, the bract itself? It'd be a rabbit hole, that's for sure.
Oh, for sure. Which is the awesome thing about brewing science. There's always something else to study, right? But then that's also another question too. What if you pelletized them, right? When you pelletize it and mash it all together?
Well, that's the one thing. One of the things we did was we did one of the seeds where we crushed it, and then we also had a whole seed. Dry hopping with a whole hop seed didn't trigger much hop creep, but once you crushed it, it kind of mimicked. It would go through like a hammer mill to then be made in the pellet, and then it really did trigger the hop creep once you exposed, the inside of the seed, or if you crushed the whole hop itself that had, some seeds in it also, as well as the bract, so on and so forth.
Yeah, and I am sad, Vinny, that we never got to do that episode on the Brü Lab. We talked about it. That's okay. Mm-hmm. But yeah, you can also find this information out there. I think there's a presentation that Vinny did a few years back that I think is available either through, I think it's through MBAA that it's available, but I don't remember for sure. I do remember looking at that in preparation for my master's defense, and yes, that was one of the closed door questions. Is okay, if hops have these enzymes that produce hop creep, where are they in the plant? And Russian River did some interesting research, which was really, really fun. Okay, so all right, so then you guys have obviously been a part of a lot of brewing science, and Vinny mentioned earlier, how there's this artistic piece of it, and it's something that we've talked about a lot on the Brü Lab, which is, how is beer an art or a science? So I want to ask each of you. So are you in more in the art camp or in the science camp, or of course you can also go with the cop-out answer, which is that everything in balance, or a little bit of both. But Vinny, since you brought it up earlier, let's start with you. Art or science?
I'm down the middle. Early on in my brewing career, be it home brewer or professional, I was definitely more on the art side, and then I learned more about the science and the technical side of brewing. I've never lost that artistic side, and I think that's important, being the person that runs our pilot brewery. I will say now, as a brewery business co-owner with Natalie, we tend to just hire folks that are smarter than me. Our team that runs our lab, and our lab manager, and our brewing manager, Garrison, and it's a whole team effort. But so that allows me to also have these great minds that I can pull from as well for whatever I'm doing in the pilot brewery.
Yeah, that's great. How about you, John? Art or science?
Beer is applied science first and foremost. That's the foundation for consistency and quality. There's a scientific way to measure most of the parameters that are important in beer. But most beers also have some element of artistic expression, which is what drives a lot of the creativity and innovation in brewing.
I love it. Stacy Williams said something very similar to me. Stacy Williams is a principal scientist at New Belgium now. The merger of Bells and New Belgium. She's a part of that. One of their lead scientists. She said almost the exact same thing. She said science informs the direction of the art. Right? It informs how and where you can be artistic and creative. Jordan, I want to ask you too. I think I've asked you this before, but let's get your answer as well. Art or science?
I think that where you lie on the spectrum is kind of style dependent. I think that lager brewing is very technical and more science oriented. Like, how artsy can you get with, fermenting 3470, right? Whereas I think like the Belgian side, the hoppy side, the sour side, that's where I get particularly artsy. I love brewing all sorts of styles, and I find myself being more kind of science driven on the lager side and really getting more expressive on some of the other styles that have more, ingredients to add to the list.
How artsy can you get brewing with 3470? Jordan, we did a whole episode on different fermentation temperatures and different yeast pitch rates and oxygenation, and that one could be pretty significant. But yeah, that's a fun one. All right, then I want to ask you all one more question before we get to the last question that I always ask in every episode. So if you've listened to the episodes, you'll know that that's coming. Wink, wink, nod, nod. But before we do that, I want to ask, how does the beer that you brew before that, I want to ask, what are you excited about for the future of brewing science? We have to go there. And so, John, you have exposure weekly to all kinds of people that are doing practical things like, centrifugation and safety and, but also science and technical application and all this stuff. So I'll ask you first, what are you most excited to see from brewing science in the future?
I am most excited for whatever future innovation is hopefully coming that will make beer outperform spirits and wine, and will make beer, the everyday drink that make the masses sort of have an appreciation for beer. We've made a lot of progress since Vinnie and I got started in this industry, and the industry's transformed, and there's a lot of new beer drinkers out there, or beer drinkers that have been converted from drinking one style of beer to a lot of different styles of beer. But I think there's a lot of work to do. I think spirits is really kind of eating our lunch, and it would be really nice to see people have a deeper connection with beer. And I think there's a lot of good reasons why we should want that too, right? I mean, we see the trend of non-alcoholic beer becoming such a big deal. Well, beer's already the drink of moderation, right? So, I think that we should do more to promote that. Beyond that, I guess I'm excited. We don't know what we don't know, right? So I don't know what I'm going to be excited about because I don't know what's coming. But I tell you what, we've seen some innovations that, I never would have dreamed were possible. I mean, look at some of the GMO yeast stuff. That's stuff that, I would have guessed aliens were going to invade before that was going to happen if you told me that when I first started brewing, right? So, I think there's a lot to be excited about in the future. So I don't know. We'll see what happens.
Yep. Vinnie, how about you as a commercial brewer? What are you excited about?
I'm really excited for all these advanced hop products, these flowable high oil hops, as we call them here at Russian River, to see what, we can do on efficiency on the dry hop side, as an IPA brewer, and as the, consumer demands more and more hop aroma and that sort of thing. What can we pair with, T90 hops? We're still going to always need those T90 hops for the polyphenol load and so on and so forth. But to me, that's one area that we're spending a lot of time on in the pilot brewery, and have for the last couple of years, as different hop companies have come out with, and different vendors have come out with different products. That to me is really exciting, and to see how they work and how we can apply it to our operation and be more efficient. Of course, first and foremost, it's got to make a great beer. But if we can get a little better yield to boot, I'll take that too.
Yeah, I agree. I like that too. It's so cool to see all the different products, right? We were just talking about Euphorics recently, right? Which is the new, that's the sort of flavorant, right? That's a hop-derived flavorant from Haas that they've got going. That's a really cool and super pungent. Jordan has a great peach hop water going right now, which is made using that. Jordan, what are you excited about for the future?
Yeah, Vinny stole my answer. I was going to say the same thing. And so I guess a little different spin on that is I would love to see the prices come down some, because at the homebrew scale. Because at the homebrew scale, like, the losses that we're dealing with aren't really that big of a deal. And so I could see how there could be a huge financial advantage for pro breweries using it. But I'm not really worried about the, pint of loss that I get for my crazy high dry hop loads. So I'm absolutely loving the character that I'm getting from, the Spectrums and the Incognitos, et cetera, using the McNair method to great success. but would love for the price point to come down. So I think we need more homebrewers using them because they are really spendy at the homebrew level without any losses to avoid.
Says the guy that's putting like 10 pounds per barrel equivalents of hops in his IPAs. I could totally see that. I would also echo to Jordan for homebrewers the continued availability of products to homebrewers, right? Getting those out to homebrewers who may make the next breweries or may make the next beer. I just talked with Simon Carlson from Novo Nessus, which used to be Novozymes and Carl Hansen. I think it's their merger. But we were talking about the ways that enzymes can improve brewing processes, right? You could make a 50% rye Russian Imperial Stout that is 12%, right? Using enzymes, using different sorts of things. New beer styles. I'm not suggesting that that's going to be the next great thing, but I don't know if we're competing with spirits, a way to get higher alcohol beers might be something, or in that sweet range of like 3.5 to 5%, where I can drink a lot, but I don't get drunk or have the hangover. All those things. Those are fun to see. All right. The question that I ask at the end of every episode is, if you want brewers to take away just one thing from today's episode, what would it be? But I'm not going to limit it to today's episode. I would say if you want brewers to take away one thing, like a final send-off of the Brü Lab, what would it be? And Jordan, I'm going to start with you because you should be the most prepared to answer this question.
I think that what I've learned along this journey is that even at the homebrew level, we have so much to learn from the pro side and the research scientists like at OSU and so on and so forth about what they're doing and how we can apply it at the homebrew level. Some of the stuff that John gets into in his podcast about centrifuges and stuff might not be that relevant to us, but there's so much that we can glean from these experts that are focusing on their jobs, and using this knowledge that's made for a professional industry, we really can make some of the best beer on the planet in our garages.
I love it. John, how about you? If you want them to take away just one thing, what would it be?
All right. You asked for one, but I'm going to give you three. The first is stay curious, but also make sure you've got a reliable source of truth, because there's plenty of bad information out there. I have nothing to gain by recommending master brewers because producing the podcast for them isn't my day job. But I do think that's a must-have membership for anyone who is serious about brewing, because the resources are so extensive. The second is, if you've never tried Vinnie's beer, figure out how to get some. I'm usually pretty skeptical of any hype beer or brewery, especially if it involves waiting in line. But I've really enjoyed Russian River beer every time I've had an opportunity to try it. STS Pils is a go-to anytime I can find it. And Vinnie sent me some Pliny for President a couple of months ago, and that was really, really good. And finally, we can't support homebrewers, but if you're a commercial brewer, please consider buying your next box of hops via the Lupulin Exchange, because that is my day job and what feeds my family. So I really appreciate the support.
Yeah, of course. Those are great. I love those recommendations, John. And I will plug the MBAA podcast because it's still a fantastic resource and will continue to be a fantastic resource, especially for scientific and technical knowledge, right? That's applicable both to home brewers and commercial brewers. All right, Vinnie, last but not least, one thing that you would want brewers to take away.
I'm going to take a little more of a broader look, maybe a 30,000 foot view, or whatever that saying is. And that's that. And it's something that all of us has done. All three of you buy your podcasts. And for me, it's being on podcasts and contributing articles and, recipes. And that's to give back. I think about all the time that John gives, for the MBA podcast and Jordan and Cade, you guys doing this podcast. And, it takes a lot, and it takes a lot of time to answer homebrew questions. Or if you're a home brewer, go to your local club and teach another, up and coming home brewer or something. It's really rewarding to give back. And, my mom was a school teacher before my parents had the winery, so maybe that's why I like doing that. But it's a really good thing to do, to pay it forward. And you've done that with this podcast, Cade. And although it's ending, this information is now available forever, and it's really cool that you and Jordan and John with the MBA podcast can offer all this information for brewers around the world to use.
Yeah, that's a great 30,000 foot view. And I hope that that's what we've done with the Brü Lab podcast, is put this information out there in a way that's accessible to everybody. Well, fellas, this has been a fantastic final episode. Thank you so much for joining me in the Brü Lab and for your continued dedication to brewing science. And as Vinnie said, talking about it and giving back to those people that can use it. So thank you, each of you, for being on the show.
Yeah, thanks.
Thank you. Awesome.
Quite a ride. Thanks, Cade.
Yeah, well, it's been my honor and my pleasure to talk with not just you guys on this episode, but everybody that has ever been or appeared on the Brü Lab. It has absolutely been my honor to speak with you and talk with you about the amazing things that you're doing for brewing. And listeners, of course, this isn't goodbye. It's just see you later. So if you're ever at a conference or just want to grab a beer with me, I'd love to connect. Shoot me an email and we'll get together. And I'll see y'all then. The Brü Lab is a production of Brülosophy, where they who drink beer think beer. Don't forget to visit Brülosophy.com to read about our weekly experiments and other brewing adventures, and listen to us talk about it on our other show, the Brülosophy Podcast. Thanks to all of our sponsors and patrons that help make this show possible. If you'd like to receive a reward for helping us do what we do, visit patreon.com/Brülosophy to see how you can do just that. Thanks so much for listening.
The most wonderful time of the year. Although, let's be honest, around the holidays, things really add up. But here's the good news. Only at Verizon, you can get a single line for $50 per month when you switch and bring your phone. So while ice skating for two is definitely costing more, here at Verizon, you can save. Gifts for your third cousins? Steep. A single line with Verizon? Not so steep. A real tree? Pricey. A single line with Verizon? Less pricey. Flights to see Mima and Pops? Those are up. A $50 per month single line? That's down. Even a trip to the Atlanta Holiday Market will cost you more. But with Verizon, you can switch and bring your phone for just $50 per month for a single line on unlimited welcome, with autopay plus taxes and fees. All this to say, during the holiday season, when everything is costing more, you can get more for less right now at a local Verizon store. $15 monthly promo credits applied over 36 months with a new line on unlimited welcome. In times of congestion, unlimited 5G, 4G LTE may be temporarily slower than other traffic. Domestic data roaming at 2G speeds. Additional terms apply.